What's up, you guys? Welcome to episode 460 of the Established Run NBA podcast. I'm Mike Gallagher here with Dinkmeyer and Austin Yamada to talk about a thrilling and strong closeout for OKC to get the series to 2-2. Talk about kind of how they did it, why Indiana's offense really dried up, and whether they could kind of turn this around. Game 5, the biggest game of the series for sure. Excited for this one. Austin, how's it going?
Good. Ready to talk about it.
Yeah, for sure. We'll touch a little bit on the Desmond Bane trade for sure. That was wild and came out of nowhere. It was like, oh, did Shams get hacked? That was fun. Dink, how you feeling today?
Good. Yeah, I will say midway through the second half of Game 4, I was starting to feel like maybe Indiana was just a better team than OKC. So absolutely awesome finish from OKC, specifically J-Dub and SGA really closing out the game. SGA turning on strong, and it has big implications for how these two teams might square off in Game 5 as well, some of the adjustments that the Thunder made in that second half. So I'm excited to talk through it.
Yeah, to that point, going into the fourth quarter, the game was, at one point they had 10 more 3-pointers. The Pacers did. I think they were one of 11 or one something along those lines, and they just didn't have any 3-point shooting. But then Indiana's 3-point shooting dried up, didn't make any 3-pointers in the fourth quarter. That was a pretty big trend there. But yeah, this OKC kind of got back on track. Should also note that OKC went just 0 of 8 on wide open looks, so they were not getting anything clean. Indiana's defense was really, really good here. But really the story of the game, I think, were two things. SGA in the fourth had 15 points in the fourth quarter after not doing much. They've been pressing him a ton. We'll talk about that. And then Lou Dort's defense on Halliburton, I thought, were the two biggest factors there. Anything you want to add on those two issues? And I guess kind of pulling back to, can OKC get their 3-point rate up? It's been really down. But Austin, what did you see from Game 4 to get this nice OKC win here to even it up?
Yeah, I don't really think that the OKC deserved that win. Like, they shot 3 of 16 from 3. They were trailing, for most of the night. I thought Indiana, outplayed them, and OKC just, besides some late shot making that went against Indiana, I thought both teams received a favorable whistle, but OKC just won the free throw game. They went to the line 38 times. They went 34 of 38. We knew that was coming from the refs. These are some of the highest foul calling refs going in. But I guess I felt like it was a bit of a ref show, and OKC just benefited slightly more, and they made more of their free throws, which if you are going to get that many free throws and you make them, that's not lucky. It's good that they made 90% of their free throws and Indiana made 75. That is a real skill thing. But at the same time, it just feels like, when you have different crews and different game states and stuff, you're just kind of rolling the dice on what aspect of the game will be highlighted today. And that game happened to be foul drawing and free throw shooting and making, and OKC was better at it. That doesn't mean it was a cheap or a fake win, but I guess it did feel like we highlighted, some other entity that wasn't OKC or Indiana kind of highlighted one thing that we're going to really feature, and OKC won that aspect despite kind of losing a lot of other aspects.
Yeah.
Not that 15 turnovers isn't a lot for Indiana, but another game where the turnover battle was pretty even. So yeah, I think if you are an OKC fan, you kind of feel like you stole one here. Granted, I feel like they lost game 1 out of their grips. So it's 2-2 seems fair as it is, but it does feel like they got home court back, and they're going back for game 5, and they kind of got one that they didn't deserve. And it's tough for Indiana to kind of lose that game that I think is quite winnable.
Yeah, I think that the one area they won, I thought that was really big, which actually didn't have anything to do with the double big lineup. They rebounded really well, especially late in the game. They had a lot of really big rebounding edge in the fourth quarter. Yeah, in the fourth, it was 12-4 for rebounding there. So yeah, this killed him on the boards there. But yeah, Dink, what do you see? Definitely we'll talk more about SGA and all the pressure he's been facing with more J-Dub, who was fantastic again. 2 good games here. But what do you see from OKC to get this win?
Yeah, sort of what Austin alluded to, in the sense that I thought OKC's process in terms of the shots that they were getting in this game were far inferior to Indiana. I thought Indiana also did a great job at 50-50 balls just generally. I know we talked in the fourth quarter about losing the rebounding battle, but I think throughout the game they got it seemed like 60% of kind of 50-50 balls and create extra possessions themselves that way. Ultimately, like, I think what happened late in the game for both teams is the game got a little bit isolation heavy late in the game, and I think OKC is just better prepared with Shai Gilgeous-Alexander as a better isolation player than Tyrese Haliburton, than Pascal Siakam, who are both very very credible isolation players in their own right. But SGA is just arguably the best isolation player in the league, and so I thought that's kind of how the game ended up coming down. I was impressed by OKC's ability to kind of keep withstanding runs. I thought that was really important. Alex Caruso was phenomenal in this game, and really kind of helped with shot making, which is not really typically where you expect Alex Caruso to help, including like a fadeaway two that he made that was contested. That was really impressive. So I thought OKC kind of, stole one here. And as Austin alluded to, Indiana kind of stole one in game one. So 2-2 feels fair from here. I think, from the original assessment of the series that we felt very confident in OKC, and certainly I laid minus 675 on them in the series. Knowing what I know now after those 4 games, I do not feel great about that price that I laid there. Indiana's been very, very good. And I think in general, the things that they've been very good at is disrupting flow for OKC's offense. And this was another game where the assist totals for OKC were just way, way down. I think in total, they had just 11 assists on 37 made baskets. And they're making OKC play through a lot of isolation, which OKC is comfortable with playing through. But with Nembhard, with Nesmith, with Shepherd, those guys are making it hard and tough. And you saw how some of the substitution patterns change as well, as Mark Dagnall was trying to conserve Shai Gilgeous-Alexander for the fourth quarter, which ended up working out great. He closed out the game effectively. But I thought a couple of things from my vantage point that really stood out. OKC's basically said, okay, we want to hunt Aaron Nesmith. We want to get Nembhard off of Shai as much as possible. So we started seeing these J-Dub Shai pick and roll sets. They weren't really pick and rolls. They were just switches because Shai wasn't really rolling to the basket. But that got a lot of Nesmith on Shai late. And Shai seemed much more comfortable with Nesmith. A lot of the stuff that Shai can do to, encourage fouls. Nesmith is vulnerable to falling forward. Nembhard's a little bit more susceptible to staying on the ground and kind of not giving up position. And so I thought that was really effective for OKC. But is that like a long-term diet for offense to continue to win, just like over and over spamming like isolation basketball? I don't know. And Indiana is not really helping off of the shooters. So the shooters aren't really getting good looks. You can see like Lu Dort shot the ball really well in the series, but his volume is way, way down. And so when they're getting threes, it's kind of only off of like offensive rebounds. There's not a lot in transition that either team's really getting at this point. So for me, I was impressed that OKC was able to pull out that win. I still think OKC can, close out the series through exceptional defense. But I think the offensive process, I have a lot of concerns about for OKC going forward. And they're trying to basically play like 2-on-5 out there with isolation ball between J-Dub and SGA and occasionally Chet. And I think that's a tough recipe for big offensive performances. And if they're not going to be able to get out in transition and get the turnovers that they've generated throughout the playoffs and throughout the regular season, I start to wonder, like, okay, does OKC have to start to win these games in the low 100s or in the 90s instead of these games that get into the 110s, 120s that they've been comfortable with throughout the season? And it looked, for me coming into the series, I didn't see a lot of ways for Indiana to really disrupt OKC's offense, but they certainly have to this point.
Yeah, to the transition point, Indy just had 7.3% of their possessions in transition. That's their third lowest in any game this year. OKC 13.4%. So they got back on track. Certainly not a high number there. But yeah, I did want to talk more about SGA. Some pretty cool stats from Synergy on the defensive pressure. According to the defensive pressure stat, he had the most defensive pressure in any playoff game. The last 2 games, the Pacers had 42 full court presses in game 4. That's the most in any game this postseason, any game overall. And then it was the SGA brought the ball up just 34% and 31% in the last 2 games. That's his lowest total in a playoff any game. So do you think that this is going to continue, which puts J-Dub in a pretty good spot? J-Dub was fantastic. So it sounded like Dink kind of thought that they were going to kind of have a similar approach Indiana's defense. So would you expect SGA to get that much pressure, Austin? And how would the Thunder handle? Is it just massive J-Dub again?
So I wanted to note, last game we saw a departure in Shai's normal rotations, which I think Doesn't seem that weird for like if you're not like a super rotation nerd. But I think like if you've been following OKC all year, like Shea always plays the entire first and third quarter and then comes back halfway through the second and fourth. Unless there's a bigger run, his rotations are based on Jokic's. This like the entire first and third, and then the minutes that he's not on to start the second and fourth are always J-Dub plus the bench, and that didn't happen last game. And I looked into it. It doesn't seem to be highlighted too many places, but like I'm looking, I don't see any foul trouble or any like he just checked out at the 5:05 mark. The only other time OKC really flips that is like when things are going so bad that Dagnall just does a complete line change, and he didn't do that. Like
Or
they just went on,
J-Dub nuking. He's done it a couple times this year when J-Dub's just on the heater and he'll flip it.
right, but I guess yeah, J-Dub went to the line a bunch, but like I don't really see an obvious like okay, this is why they did it. I know they started out -7, but like by the time Shea checked out, it was like a bit of a correction. Like to me, it was just odd, and so I think we can go into like why Dagnall would do this, because not only did he check him out early, but like he continued this 3 rotation pattern the entire game, including like Shea with the bench, both bench units. I think there are 2 things here. One could be like you said, the pressure, just like like Shea is working so hard. Like let's take him out early and preserve him so he doesn't run these super long stretches. We'll give him like three runs with 2 rests instead of 1 really long 12-minute stretch. The other possibility has nothing to do with how Indiana was defending him. It could just be like Shea is a better offensive player than J-Dub, and like he doesn't really trust the bench as much as he normally does. So let me like stagger in a way where if Shea's gonna like be a ball hog and take all these possessions anyways, why not do that when you don't have Chet and J-Dub on the floor? Why don't you do that when you have these low usage bench players? So I don't really know the exact reason that Dagnall did it, but I'm just like noting that I think it's worth talking about, and like that is a possible reason as a counter for the defensive pressure. I don't know if that's true or not. I think either way, like OKC is both, very fortunate to have another ball handler in J-Dub, but also like you look at their roster and they have a ton of depth and flexibility and all these pieces to move. But like outside of J-Dub, OKC doesn't really have many other ball handlers. Like the way they built their roster is like they need Shea and J-Dub to function, and then you build all these complementary players that accentuate those 2 so well. But there's almost nothing that OKC can't replicate if someone goes down, with ball handling being the main one. Hartenstein is good at like initiating offense in the half court. You can run like some high post stuff through him, but like actually bringing the ball up, like you could maybe do Kaysen or maybe Aaron Wiggins, but they don't really have a lot of other ball handlers, and like I don't think they're going to bring in an AJ, someone random like that just to add ball handling. So like they're going to need to figure out this coverage on Shea. And like it's not that they struggled, but it slowed the pace down. It took them longer to into their sets, and like they don't want Shea working as hard as possible, bring up the ball for 40 plus minutes every night. So I do think it was like a very conscious tactic by Indiana, and we'll see how Dagnall counters.
Yeah, I don't know if that was like he didn't really get away from Nembhard. Like Nembhard was still kind of subbing in for most of his stuff too, so I thought that may be another reason there. But yeah, that's gonna be something to watch for sure to see who subs out. Dink, anything you wanted to add on SGA, and then yeah, just to shout out J-Dub again. He was just absolutely cooking. His drive, SGA's drives are down. J-Dub's drives are up. He killed him on drives, 17 points on 17 drives in Game 4. Arguably, but before the fourth, he was clearly the best player, but SGA big in the fourth there. But yeah, anything on that duo's dynamic, and adding to Austin's point, how else could they alleviate the pressure? We talked about the assists. It wasn't like, running really bad at potentials. They only had 24 potential assists in this game. So the ball movement was really, really down. Only 203 passes made. That is an insanely low number overall. So the ball movement. But yeah, how else could OKC kind of, you mentioned that it was kind of a gross offense, but how could they kind of get back on track?
Unfortunately, I think like a lot of the ways that you could kind of get back on track with the way that Indiana is defending things is stuff that OKC doesn't do a ton of. It's a lot of off-ball screening and different things like that, kind of like weak side screening to try to create chaos defensively. Because right now, what you've seen with OKC is it's a lot of like kind of like one man action with pick and roll stuff to get Shea, and then get teams in rotation with Shea or J-Dub's ability to touch paint. and that's what OKC's offense sort of relies upon. And Indiana has basically not had to get into rotation too much because Shea's had a harder time touching paint. J-Dub's been a little bit more effective at touching paint, but even at that point, J-Dub's not as much of a threat as SGA in terms of like foul drawing and different things like that. So they're still able to kind of stay with their guys. And so I think that you're going to have kind of this isolation heavy, grosser offense. This often happens as you get deeper into the series in the finals. If you look at a lot of box scores from like games 5, 6, and 7 in the finals in the past, in series that are competitive 2-2s, you get a lot of lower scoring affairs towards the end of the series. And I think that's kind of where we're at, where Indiana, from a defensive standpoint, has presented enough challenges for OKC that schematically for OKC to try to make things easier for themselves, it requires them doing stuff that they just haven't done much all season in terms of off-ball screening and different things like that really can free up guys. So I think this is going to continue to be very isolation heavy. I think the rotation change in terms of SGA coming out midway through the first quarter, I think that's going to stick. I think Austin kind of highlighted why with having him with the bench unit just gives the bench unit a little bit more juice. They were getting killed in those bench points routinely. Like game 3 was just real bad from a bench points perspective. And so I think they're trying to find ways to slow that down and slow the bench down by getting buckets on the other end. The one thing you give up with that though is, the existing rotation patterns for SGA had him in what you would consider the likely bonus territory for free throw shooting in all 4 quarters. And now you're getting it down to maybe 2 to 3 quarters. He did play extended minutes in the second half to get up to 40 minutes overall, so it was kind of in the bonus in both areas. But that under 2 minutes where it's 2,000 immediate free throws, or teams have already in the bonus, like Shea seeding that in the first quarter, I think is somewhat interesting. But I think they're going to have to. I think they're going to continue to stick with the Shea J-Dub, pick and roll, pick and pop type stuff and try to get the switches that they like. And I think Shea's going to continue to try to attack Nesmith because I think they are more comfortable with Shea attacking Nesmith and Nembhard. And I think this is something that Nembhard probably deserves some credit for is, as all these series have gone on, whoever like the primary scorer has gotten Nembhard kind of early in the series. And then he's sort of locked him down as the series has gone on. Like he sort of found the timing and the rhythm with defending these guys. Like Brunson, towards the end of the series against Indiana struggled a little bit more. Donovan Mitchell obviously was battling some injury issues and stuff, but early in the series was much more effective than he was later in the series. And I think that's somewhat a testament to Nembhard's ability to sort of, learn and adapt and figure out some of these high-end scorers, how to best defend them and make things harder on them. And I think in some ways he's done that with Shea. Like he's made things really, really tough on Shea. And so I think the Thunder have started to opt for another path and another player to attack, and that's Nesmith. And so I think that's going to be the way that they're going to continue to try to attack things. There's not much that that Indiana can do defensively. Like you kind of have to give up those switches. Maybe you could hedge harder out on Jada, but then you leave like 4 and 5 against Shea, and I don't think you want that. So I think they're just going to have to kind of give up these switches and ultimately like hope that Nesmith can put up some of the resistance that Nembhard has so far for Shea.
Mm-hmm. And then did want to talk about the adjustment a couple games ago when they went with double big. We saw 10 minutes of the double big lineup in game 4. Hasn't really done much, and like I said, open, like they rebounded well, but it wasn't like because of that. I thought it was, just kind of a litany of guys. Chet was fantastic on the boards too. But Caruso I thought was another really big story here. Not surprised to see him play 30 minutes. Crazy stat from ESPN that I didn't believe, that Caruso didn't score 20 points at all in the regular season and has done so twice in the finals. First player to do that. How much double big are we going to see, Austin? And is it like Caruso like 80% to close in a close game? Just that overall dynamic, and then tying in Case and Wallace. We talked about Dort, but and then we could talk about Chet separately. But these role players, do you see it being similar for how those minutes are going to be deployed with the double big, with Caruso kind of leading the charge for this? It's like the clear like bench guy.
I don't feel strongly one way or the other on the double big because like they tried it and they won, but also Dagnall is a process guy, and like it didn't go that well. They opened very poorly to start the game, and Dagnall probably would agree with us that he's not sure they should have won. So I feel very, very neutral about it. I don't think we'll see a ton of it, but I feel neutral on like whether or not I think Hartenstein's going to start again. It could be Could go back to Kaysen. I guess the only real other option would be Caruso starting. Um, man, it just feels like Caruso's so good. And like, remember when he was like in the last couple of years with the Bulls, they mentioned how his his back and his legs are just like a chronic issue that will never like fully recover for the rest of his career. And like the doctors basically said, like we would only recommend playing him in like 4 to 6 minute stretches at the most. And like even when Caruso plays heavy, it's like play 4 to 6 minute stretches with OKC and then quick rest and then back again. And like he should be playing more than 30 minutes. And like the best way to get him to play more than 30 without violating those rules, and also just because he plays so hard and he has some uses on like you should be, dispersing those minutes over 48 minutes rather than over, you're just hamstringing yourself that he's not available for the first 5 minutes of each half. I know we've talked about it and it hasn't happened. I mean, that's what I would do is probably start Caruso, but curious if you guys have leans on like the double big and who you think is starting.
I think they're going to start double big. Dagnall said that he was kind of comfortable with it, and he liked the minutes that it shook out. And then, yeah, to your point, I think if you did ask Dagnall, I think he thought they were going to lose. He said that Indiana felt like they had to win it their back the whole game, which they kind of did. But yeah, Dink, thoughts on basically how this is going to get split? And I'd probably say it like 75% they start double big.
Yeah, I think they should start Caruso, but I think they're probably more likely. I think there's some aspect of trust with Caruso in the second unit as well. Like they're obviously trying to bolster that second unit and not try to take away from it by moving SGA into that unit a little bit more and trying to like slow down Indiana's bench advantage. So I think keeping Caruso there might be something that they're comfortable doing to try to do that. But I didn't think the double big stuff was particularly great defensively. I thought it left them on an island where they were having to do things that they're not super comfortable with. They started out in zone in the third quarter because they were struggling with it in so much in the first half. I thought, ideally the whole purpose of the double big out there for them, right, is twofold. One, it's to be able to help seed some of the rebounding advantage that Indiana created in game one. I think that was largely effective, but not because of the double big. And then I think two is Isaiah Hartenstein's just an exceptional screener, and that's the best way to try to relieve some of the pressure that's being put on SGA. But I think they sort of found their solve with that when SGA and J-Dub are both on the floor together, with having J-Dub just be the handler and just ultimately like have SGA be the screener. And so that's where I'm a little bit torn. I think Hartenstein on the floor with SGA just makes so much sense. And I think they try to get more to that in the second unit as well because of his screening capability. And when J-Dub's off the floor and SGA is going to get pressured that way, like Hartenstein needs to be out there to set screens and get shit and be, the short roll man, and a way that their offense can kind of still operate in the principles that it's operated all season long. But whether they start that way, I don't know. I think I'm more like 50-50 on it. I do think they get stuck playing in space in a way that's really uncomfortable for them with that double big lineup. Because like Hartenstein is just not the best lateral mover. Chet's not the best lateral mover. You can get one of them, like Chet is fine in isolation out on the perimeter. Hartenstein's a little bit more vulnerable there, and Indiana can start to hunt stuff a little bit more. So I think if we do see it, I think it's possible that you see kind of a relatively like quicker sub from it, like maybe at the 8-minute mark, something like that. But I think ultimately, like you'll see a lot of Hartenstein paired with SGA in that second unit when J-Dub's off the floor to try to relieve some of the ball pressure that's being put on SGA. And I think, that I don't see like a huge ceiling to the overlap in minutes for those two bigs. I thought we saw more Kenrich Williams, who I thought was really effective in this game. I wouldn't be surprised to continue to see that. He's another guy that can bring the ball up. These guys OKC has a lot of guys that can bring the ball up, but not a lot of guys who can like initiate offense. So where Austin was talking about, like they don't have a lot of ball handlers. They have guys that they're okay with like bringing it up the floor if there's not going to be insane pressure on them. Like Chet was bringing it up off of defensive rebounds at times. But those guys, you can see Indiana salivating at half-court traps. Like as soon as they cross the half-court line, they're trying to bring pressure on those ball handlers. And so Kenrich is a guy that you can kind of do that a little bit with, so I wouldn't be surprised to see his minutes stick from game 4. But ultimately, I think I'm more like 50-50 between Hartenstein and Caruso. I think there's a chance that they just don't want Caruso to start because they really want him in the second unit. And then that would be between Hartenstein and Walls. And in those spots, I lean Hartenstein. So it's more, to me, it's like are you trying to protect Caruso and the second unit together? If so, then Hartenstein probably starts. If you're not worried about that, then I think Caruso probably starts.
Yeah, do you think it's maybe 50-50 or less that like Caruso starts the second half? Like I think that's a card that we've seen Dagnall play a pretty good bit. Yeah, I don't have too much to say on Chet. Should note Chet got hurt early in this game and rolled his ankle and looked like he might come out, but stayed in there and played 37 minutes. His minutes have gone up in every game of this series. Everyone was wondering like, what the hell? Why are you playing Chet 24? Then he gets up there in 37. Really, really big impact on the boards. I thought his defense was really good after, I would say, a subpar series for him. But yeah, anything on chat, I'll echo. I think Kenrich, I wrote in matchup says, I think Kenrich is like the favorite after Caruso. I'm sorry, Caruso and Kaysen. Like I think he could kind of like cut into Wiggins, cut into Isaiah Joe. Maybe they want more 3-point volume. I could see Joe coming up just to get 3-point volume. Like you can't shoot 16 3-pointers in 2025. But yeah, anything you want to add on chat, and then we could kind of hit the Indiana side of this a little more. Austin, what do you see from chat?
Yeah, Chet's been really good, and like has kind of, so I think talking about Chet, Hartenstein, Kenrich, and then just like the whole starter bench thing all kind of ties together. We see OKC as this really deep team, which it is, but I think we agree like in this specific matchup, like Isaiah Joe probably isn't it. He played 4 minutes, got off 1 shot attempt and 2 fouls. He's small. Like I do think we're getting to this point where like OKC is starting to emphasize their best players in a way that Dagnall doesn't really do. But like most teams would do in the NBA Finals, like we're seeing these starters push them into huge minutes. It does feel like the starting 5 plus Caruso and Kaysen are like the top 7, but then like you actually are getting to a rare point that OKC doesn't usually get to, where you do have to fill minutes with rotation players that you may not want to. And like because Kenrich has been very serviceable, and Dagnall also feels pretty happy with Kenrich, like the best way to get Kenrich minutes is to start Hartenstein. So again, like I'm not saying this is what I would do necessarily, but I think if you're just trying to fill out 48 minutes, that would be the one argument in favor of Caruso off the bench. Is basically if you started Caruso or Kaysen, then you're running 7.5, 8, maybe Wiggins makes 9, like players that you want to play, but then Kenrich and Hartenstein have to go together off the bench when like Kenrich's best minutes have kind of come as a small ball 4-5. So that would be the only argument I see for the most part in favor of starting Hartenstein again. It's just kind of filling out enough minutes. Like you guys said, it's definitely possible for Hartenstein to start the first half and then Caruso to start the second half, because in the last 24 minutes you're worried a bit less about can we get these minutes dispersed and just like, okay, let's play our best players as many minutes as possible. So that's kind of, I think it's very reasonable to start Hartenstein first half and Caruso second half, especially if, and that kind of ties into Chet, like if Chet's playing that well, you don't need 2 bigs. The OKC is best with like SGA, Caruso, J-Dub at the 4, Chet at the 5, and then kind of whoever's running best as kind of like a 1 through 3, which probably is Dort. That's all I have to add, really.
Yeah, I think Kenrich in with one of SGA or J-Dub off. I mean, he played point guard like a little bit 3-4 years ago they had him slotted in point guard minutes. He's got some pretty good handles, so I think he kind of covers your bases with size and with additional handling there. Which brings me to the Pacers side here. Dick, if you want to add anything on what Austin said, go for it. But did want to talk about. Do you want to chime in real quick and then we can?
Yeah, I was just going to note it's interesting because I was looking back through the rotations and I need to correct myself that actually like Hartenstein was kind of off the floor with SGA with these sub patterns, and it was Kenrich that was on the floor with him a little bit more. And I think some of that is the ultimate decision of like, okay, let's have SGA not even bring the ball up as much, and let's have SGA be the screener, and let's have like we can have Kenrich bring the ball up instead of like needing the screen from Hartenstein to free up SGA. I think that's one of their solves last game. It'll be interesting to see how Indiana tries to attack some of that stuff. But yeah, I'm in agreement with you guys that I think Kenrich is like a pretty important piece going forward for how to attack Indiana.
And then going to the Indiana side, a couple things stood out. Pascal Siakam disappearing after in the fourth quarter. I believe he scored his 20. I don't think he scored at all. He like barely touched the ball in the fourth quarter. Miles Turner's been sick, been playing really poorly on both sides. He has 0 presence at the rim. I think he has 1 layup in this series. Hasn't been able to get anything going. Mentioned Aaron Nesmith. hasn't really been performing too well. One of his worst defensive games all playoffs there. Nemhard's been fantastic, but really these non-Halliburton starters, Austin, is there anything you saw from those guys to kind of get back on track? And just overall, I think, like I said, the headline was just their defense and their frustration and not being able to run at all. They couldn't establish the run to up their tempo there. But yeah, anything you noticed from the Indy rotation to have like I said, one of their worst offensive games they've had in any game this season?
Yeah, and I think it's even I guess like I'm not necessarily in agreement that it was like one of their worst offensive games all season. They could have made more of their free throws, especially from the bench unit, and I guess they weren't great from the field or from three, but I didn't think it was terrible, especially if you look at the way like offenses have fared against OKC's defense over the course of these playoffs.
Mm-hmm.
So I think we should talk about Siakam because it's an interesting one. I gave out an unofficial prop to our subs at under 19.5, and man, he ends at 20, and I felt like he got so many like early game like transition, just
25% of his points in transition.
Yeah. In a series that has been no transition, like he got so many in the first quarter in transition, and then so much at the line when like with all these foul callers, like granted, I think I gave it out before the officiating crew was announced, but like it just feels to me like it requires a monumental effort to score 20 points off of transition and isolation. Like those are the ways that Siakam scores, and to score 20 points against an OKC defense feels like a monumental achievement. And so like I like this under again next game. I think the counter argument would be like, okay, sure, he got really fortunate with his points early in the game, but like he was very de-emphasized in the fourth quarter. And I think you could see more of like an even dispersion of his usage throughout the game instead of like, featuring him early as this way to like, because a lot of times all the other Indiana players kind of play in the flow of the offense. It's just whoever gets the best shot. But Siakam is the only player that you really run like, let's go get Siakam some paint touches. Let's make sure that he's involved. And it does feel like a lot of games this series, they make an early sort of they're trying intentionally to get Siakam more usage early in the games that he's involved, and then they kind of just go away from it as the game goes on. So like, could Siakam, could they run more plays for Siakam down the stretch? They could. I think where Siakam is best, honestly, is he's like the one player on this roster that is drawing big attention. Like these other players don't draw the sort of like when they face Julius Randle and when they face Anthony Edwards, like all of these players that like draw all of this gravity. Siakam's really the only one on Indiana that is doing that towards the OKC defense. So like, I don't think Siakam actually going to give him the ball and on a post up and have him take on the OKC defense is the best play. But I do think giving him the ball and letting him sort of shift the defense is a decent play because Siakam's not a bad passer out of double teams.
Mm-hmm.
So like I'm ready to play this under 19.5 again. I don't think that it's necessarily Siakam scoring a billion points. I think it's maybe using Siakam as this focal point as to start the offense and just kind of draw double teams in a way that doesn't require Hallie breaking down the defense to actually shift it. Curious if you guys have any thoughts there, but that's kind of like, it just feels weird to me that like Indiana changes their offense so much Siakam early and then so little Siakam late, because it wasn't the first time this series that pattern happened.
Yeah, I mean, we just talked about how they weren't getting any. They got 7% of their possessions in transition. Like Siakam got all of them, it feels like. But yeah, we talked about this too. Siakam against good rim defenses and elite transition is really bad for him. So yeah, and then to your point there, we usually see whenever Halliburton's getting pressured, we usually see like a really big uptick to Andrew Nembhard's ball handling. That hasn't really been there. I'm curious if that's a little bit more utilized in this spot, considering the value he's provided defensively. So I think we could see a little bit more Nembhard. And I think one other note that I think for Indiana is, just overall size. I think Carlisle was really frustrated by getting killed on the boards like that. So I think they could play a little bit bigger. Ben Mathurin, Ben Shepherd, not very good rebounders. We've seen Nesmith have, a 10-plus rebounding percentage in the playoffs. He's been rebounding the ball pretty well. So I think Nesmith can kind of get pushed up. But yeah, Dink, anything from overall offensive structure and rotation notes for Indiana?
Yeah, on the Siakam stuff, I mean, the transition was self-created. He had 5 steals. So, he was the one creating the transition for himself. In Caitlin Cooper's podcast, where they were doing a lot of excellent video breakdown on Game 4, they noted, Samson, the co-host, noted that Indiana historically, when you see these games where guys have been very effective in the first three quarters and then kind of forgotten about in the fourth quarter, that they make a very concerted effort to get them going again in the first quarter, to be like, we're not going away from you. So I'm sort of interested to see if they do make a concerted effort to get Siakam the ball in the first quarter. I think the things that I note in Siakam's favor offensively is he's one of the few guys that is actually willing to try to try to take advantage of size mismatches. So when, like, what's happening right now for the Pacers offense that really stalled them out quite a bit in the fourth quarter is Miles Turner is the primary screen man and they're changing to a lot of pitch plays and dribble handoffs and stuff like that to try to get Halliburton in motion, basically going downhill with his momentum going forward instead of trying to break down off the dribble and get space. So Miles is then getting those switched onto smaller defenders, onto Dort, onto SGA, whoever, and he's not trying to steal them and get action down low. Siakam will do that stuff. So I sort of wonder if they start to switch some of these things where Siakam is the screener a little bit more. You can also do that a little bit more effectively when Miles is off the floor and Obi's on the floor, just because Obi's a little bit more willing as kind of a corner cutter in a way that Miles doesn't really do. Miles doesn't really move much. So I'm interested to see if they use Siakam kind of more in some screening actions, some of these DHO actions, to try to get him to potentially try to seal some of the smaller defenders down low and then try to drop fouls that way. He's also a little bit quicker of a decision maker with the ball on the catch than Miles Turner is. Miles Turner will bring the ball down a lot, which is just death against OKC. Siakam's a little bit better about that. Also noted that Siakam, one of the things coming into the series that we thought what happened was Siakam's three-point volume would spike a little bit because of the challenging nature of getting shots at the rim, the challenging nature of kind of breaking down things individually, and that your best shot might ultimately be kind of an in-rhythm catch-and-shoot three. We saw Siakam get 6 threes up in this game. Not many shots in the fourth quarter, so I do share your guys' concerns on Siakam's like efficiency, and he kind of sun run in terms of the level of transition he got to get to the 20 points. And I think this is going to be kind of a lower scoring series from here on out anyway. But I also think the ways that they can look at potentially improving some of his shot volume is just by having him kind of launch from three a little bit more. And as Austin alluded to, him as a playmaker, if they want to get him in that screen roll game a little bit more, he's averaging 4 assists in the series. That's, I think that's second highest on the team. He's been pretty active as a distributor and creating. So I think the ability to attack mismatches and the ability to, or the willingness to pull up from three gives Siakam some outs to having higher usage than you might normally expect. And I think as the series gets deeper and deeper, it's just going to be harder and harder for role players to have like really, really big games, because I think the teams are starting to recognize, where those guys like to get their shots, how those guys like to get their offense. And it's sort of easier to take that away. It's harder to take away, players who have diversified skill sets offensively as the series goes on, where the limited skill set guys offensively, a little bit easier to take away.
Yeah, for sure. And then going to the other bench pieces, we saw Obi Toppin again just do it in a big way, 17 points in 29 minutes. Mathurin really got cut down. I think Mathurin could kind of get squeezed a bit here. I think they may try to push up Aaron Nesmith. Should note the refs today are very light. Mark Davis gets the fewest foul calls in the NBA amongst other like average ones. So this is going to be one of the lightest foul calling crews of the finals there. But yeah, how do you see this bench shaking out? I think it's going to be a little bit tighter. Dank and I were talking about it. I'm more of a tighter, more Miles Turner, more Nesmith. Austin, where do you kind of come down for how these minutes are distributed for the starters and the bench? We are getting McConnell overlap again, which has been valuable. He's been driving a ton. He has 15 drives in each of the last 2 games. By far the team leader in the last 2. But yeah, how do you see these minutes getting dispersed for the bench and the starters?
I don't think I'm as strong on that take. We saw.
I'm the strongest.
Yeah, I think like there's a cap to like how much Carlisle will play his starters even without to the buzzer, no fouls, nothing. Like Tyrese Halliburton is the straw that stirs the drink, and like Carlisle won't really go above 36 on Halliburton in the NBA Finals. Like it's just not his MO to play these guys. Like they're already running. Both of these coaches don't love to play their stars heavy minutes, and we're already seeing like kind of the maximum that they've been willing to go at any point in the season. Like we keep waiting for this Hallie 42-minute game that hasn't come, and like at this point, I don't believe it. Like I don't believe it's coming. And I'm just looking at like the bench unit. Like he's already trimmed it from like 11 down to 9. You could even say Matherin could play more than 13 if he plays better. And also we should talk about, was it this game that was like the worst 10-second stretch of like one of the most disastrous 10-second stretches? That was this past game, right? Like the last 10 seconds.
The missed free throws.
Missing free throws, 2 away from the play, fouls. One of the worst, given the time, that the situation, and the fact this NBA Finals, probably one of the worst 10-second stretches I've ever seen from a player, if I'm being honest. That could, like, you would think that Matherin could play more, and he like generally was fine throughout the game, which is why he got that spot when Nesmith fouled out. But also I could see Carlisle just that last sentence being burned into his brain when he's deciding who to sub in next game. I would say, and I'm a broken record, if I were to trim anyone from this bench 4 unit, it would be McConnell, not because he's bad, but because it's a tough matchup, and because it's either an overlap or taken away from these guards that we think should play more. 18 feels like a good amount for maybe too much for TJ, but also I keep saying over and over, like, I expect TJ to get cut, and he hasn't really to this point. If anything, he's been playing a little more. Outside of TJ, which I'm a broken record, I don't really see, like, Obi playing 29 kind of stands out, but like I don't think Miles has been great, and I don't think he's a great fit for this series. And I think Obi has been really good, and Obi's willing to shoot the 3, and he's like one of those like fast 3-point shooters, which is really valuable against this defense. And I thought like Obi's never been known for being a great rim protector, shot blocker, just general defender. Like that's been his weak point. But he is more mobile than Miles, and like he's at least theoretically more switchable and can like kind of just shift with the defense in a way that is useful for your quote unquote 5 or your biggest guy. So I don't think Obi's a defensive asset per se, but I think he's done as well as he can this series. And it's not like OKC's like attacking the rim relentlessly. Like they love their kind of mid-range stuff. Like the OKC's not particularly blockable. So like Miles just doesn't feel that important, especially if he's not rebounding, which he's not, and not hitting his threes, which he's not. So like, I'm not saying play Obi more. I'm saying like Obi 28 feels okay. Like that could happen again. And then Shepherd 11, Matherin 13. Other than TJ playing, it's really hard for me to see sort of places for the rotation to change a ton. So I don't really have, and like even with all the foul trouble with the starting unit, it wasn't really affecting that. Like a lot of the fouls came either late or like dispersed in a way that it didn't really affect the rotations a ton.
Yeah, just the Matherin at the end after Nesmith fouled out as well. Think anything you want to add? You and our you're a little more you're on the opposite end. Do you think it could be a little more spread out?
I would say that I'm just a little bit less bullish on Nesmith and Turner specifically. Would be my notes on the Indiana rotation. The Turner stuff, as Austin alluded to, I don't think it's a particularly great series for him, and his unwillingness to try to post up and attack mismatches and seal off guys, I think is a big problem. He hasn't been rebounding well basically this whole postseason. So, in terms of trying to solve for rebounding challenges that they've had so far, like Miles hasn't done that. His rebounds in this series are way down again. And Obi is a quick decision maker, not only a quick trigger for the 3-point shooting, but he generally is a pretty quick decision maker. Like he moves the ball back pretty quickly. It's rarely creating assist opportunities because he's usually passing the ball like right back if he doesn't have an opportunity. But he like makes decisions to drive. Miles is a little bit more slow and methodical. And I think they were also having a little bit more success with, Obi with like a mid-range game as the screener in pick and roll at the top of the key, which you never see with Indiana. So I'm a little bit more bullish on Obi, a little bit more concerned on Miles. And then with Nesmith, the things with Nesmith that, since the ankle injury that he suffered against the Knicks, he really hasn't been extended from a minutes perspective. Fouls have certainly been a part of it. But if you look back at he fouled out last game, but I think he had 3 fouls in the last 3 minutes of the game. It wasn't like he was getting, he lost the last 2 minutes that Matherin came in that he would have had potentially, but he wasn't really being restricted from foul trouble throughout the game. And then in game 3, I think it was, he had 16 minutes and 3 fouls with 6 minutes left in the game. Like fouls aren't the reason that he was cut down there. Matherin was awesome. So you saw the two tails of Matherin in this series. And I think ultimately like how well Matherin plays, I think the thing about Matherin is he's not a bad rebounder. Like Shepard's not a great rebounder, but Mathurin's like an okay rebounder. Neesmith's been better in the playoffs, but career wise, they're pretty similar from a rebounding perspective, Neesmith and Mathurin. So I think it's just like which version of Mathurin do you get? And Mathurin, he's defended better in the playoffs. He hasn't been known as a defensive player throughout his career as a prospect. He was a little bit more engaged on that end at Arizona. But I think, if Neesmith is going to get picked on as much as Mathurin was getting picked on, I think it's just like which one of them is playing better offensively and not fouling. And I don't trust Neesmith to be not fouling. In the playoffs, they dropped this on the Caitlin Cooper podcast, but he's 66th out of 67 players in terms of foul rate per shots defended, and Mitchell Robinson's the only player who was worse to this point in the season. So I just don't trust that Neesmith can stay out of foul trouble enough, regardless of whoever the foul callers are. And I know we'll get to that in a bit, that the Game 5 series is a lighter foul calling crew. I just don't trust him to stay out of foul trouble, especially if the solve for OKC's offense is, hey, we're going to switch Neesmith into every action with SGA. And I don't particularly trust the matchup of Neesmith versus SGA, keeping Neesmith out of foul trouble. So those are my concerns there. I think ultimately, like, they would love to play Neesmith more. I just don't know that he can. And like I said, since the ankle injury against the Knicks, he hasn't been good, really, either offensively or defensively. He's been getting kind of picked on. So I think you'll still see, basically like a push-pull with Mathurin and Neesmith based on who's playing more effectively. And I don't have a lot of confidence in either guy to play particularly effectively. So, whoever Carlisle feels like has the hot hand probably is getting those minutes.
Yeah, Mathurin usually gets ticked up when they're trailing too. We see him kind of play a little bit more in the fourth and try to pull a comeback off. OKC favored pretty big. I think it's 10 now. So that could be a one way to kind of undo Neesmith. But I do think, they're still going to do the attacking stuff. Like whatever option Indiana has, it's not going to be as good as Neesmith. So I think we mostly covered. Anything you want to add, to Austin?
Nope.
I think we're good. Cool. I think we've mostly covered it. You can get a good predictions here.
I want to bring up one point to the table. We're back to this 10-point spread that we started at the beginning of the series with OKC and Indiana, and 9.5-10, which is like where Game 1 closed. And I'm like perplexed because from what I've seen in this series, my expectations of Indiana have changed pretty dramatically here. I'm still not like super excited to bet against OKC at home, where they've been, traditionally just a juggernaut this postseason and this regular season. But Austin, I want to get your thoughts on that, because like my perception of Indiana has changed a good bit as the series has moved on, but the books have not. I mean, Indiana was up like 8 in the third quarter of this game, and you could still bet live FanDuel Indiana plus money to win the series when they were like, 12 minutes away from going up 3-1. So it was like plus 145 Indiana at the time when I checked, and I was like, man, I'm glad I didn't pull the trigger. I've got enough bad money in this series. But your thoughts on the 10-point line for Game 5? I thought it was expanded. Like it feels hot to me, especially when I think the series is going to play a little bit more defensively oriented the last 3 games.
Yeah, if I were forced to bet anything, I would probably bet the Pinnacle OKC -9, -109. Actually, I think at 10, I'm definitely not betting OKC. Even at 9.5, it's probably a pass. But I think I'm kind of in this like 9.75 range. So it's like the consensus line is pretty fair for me. I have like moved up on Indiana, and I don't think there's any way that you can't. But at the same time, like I bet an OKC -8.5 opener for Game 1, and I gave out a -9, and it closed I think like 10.5. So like, I guess that's just saying like, in order for me to bet something and give it to the side, like I have to think there's a pretty decent edge, and I think that's eroded, and now I think like. For me, I saw value on OKC early, and I've shifted my prior on Indiana in a way that 9.5 feels pretty reasonable to me. So I have moved, but like not enough for me to go at the same line from there's clear value on OKC to now there's clear value on Indiana. Just that's a pretty big move for me. And so like at 9, which is like if you're hunting, I think I would probably prefer that to like I prefer OKC -9 to Indiana +10, I think, but I'm not sure that I'm betting aside here. I did put a lot of money on OKC to win the series after when they were down 2-1. The one note I would say in favor of Indiana is that the zigzag effect has been pretty strong this series. So Yeah, I kind of lean under 224.5. I don't know if I'm going to bet it yet. I've been going back and forth, but I think like the reduced foul calling. So you have two things at play here. One would be that there's no way OKC shoots 16 or less threes and makes three or few. Like they're not making three threes again, you would think. And then you would think the Indians a little more efficient from the field. But at the same time, like I think transition goes away, which it had been for every prior game. And then there is just zero chance that there are 71 free throw attempts again in 48 regulation minutes. That like between the ticky tack fouls and all the bonus stuff, like that just feels so unlikely here, especially with the refs. And so I think a free throw is so valuable of a possession relative to the other shots that you can get, and especially against these defenses, that I lean under here. And then you have the change of venue, right? We go from the 2-2 to the 1-1-1. So yeah, both defenses are rested too. There was a couple days in between these games, so I lean under if I were forced to play any of these four, like side total. But like no one at this time is gonna find some line that's like 5 points off for Game 5 of the NBA Finals. So like if you're listening to this and like I think this line is off by 5 points, like you're probably off. Like you know.
Yeah, and I'll say that I mean, if you've been betting Pacers spread, like you're printing for these playoffs. Like they've covered so much. They didn't cover the last game. There you go. Nice. Yeah. Anything you want? Yeah. So I'm pretty much with you guys. Like I do not like betting. Like if you're betting against Indy, like you're clearly losing. So I'm not touching. I do take some live stuff. Like I think if there's fouls kind of pop up, I think that could be really detrimental to Indiana's depth. So that'd be a possible spot. Took OKC live. In the middle of the second, when SGA slipped back in, I took them there and got that one. But yeah, anything else? Think we can kind of get predictions.
No, I'm probably leaning towards under as a play if I'm going to play anything from this game. I really do think like the OKC offensive approach is going to be tough to generate a ton of points, and I think I guess one of my big takeaways, I just want to share this. Like I had this kind of during Game 4. Is just like I think at this point, teams that have motion offense and move the ball a bunch, I just want to give +1 game per series to in the playoffs because it's harder to figure out solves for those teams. And you look at like Golden State and Denver and Indiana, and these teams have like kind of consistently largely outperformed expectations. I know Golden State obviously got nicked by Minnesota, but that was Steph getting hurt, and they looked really, really good in the first half of Game 1 with Steph healthy. So I'm starting to think like really ball movement heavy, motion heavy offenses are just harder to solve for defensively in the playoffs, and I think it gets a little bit easier as the series wears on. But yeah, I'm leaning kind of under in the series, and like I said, I don't think I'd bet the 10, but I was just surprised, or the 9.5 or the 10, in terms of Indiana side. But I was just surprised that like we're basically at the same number that we started the series at. And I feel like there's been a lot more information that suggests Indiana is better than that number.
Yeah, I should note that OKC's half-court offense was terrible. They got propped up by putbacks as well. There's 87 points per 100 in their half-court, and defense has been trending that way. So kind of with you, I do kind of like the under. But yeah, where are we at? Have a funny feeling we're all going to say OKC in 7 at this point. But Austin, where are you at now?
Yeah, I think I'm like OKC in 6.5. Like it really feels like OKC in 6 or OKC in 7 is kind of just the only two like really valid likely options here. But I might be trending more towards OKC in 6. I think we're converging. Like I'm slowly moving back towards you guys, and you guys sounds like you're kind of moving towards me. So I might go OKC in 6 at this point.
Yeah, I should note that Pacers haven't lost consecutive games since March 10th. But yeah, I'll pick OKC in 7. Like I'm betting against the Pacers is not good. So I think where you at 6 or 7.
Yeah, I think we're just also conditioned to just immediately like it's OKC. Is it in 6 or 7? It's just like I'm so traumatized by continually dismissing the Pacers over these last two playoff runs, and so I will say OKC in 7. But I really felt like midway through the third quarter of Game 4, I was like, man, I don't know, Indiana might be the better team, like in a shocking way. Like it just felt like their process was so much better than OKC's. But I think OKC still won in a really important way, and home court advantage is huge, especially like OKC's home court is very, very strong from an advantage standpoint. So I'll go OKC in 7.
Yeah, 24 potential assists from OKC. Like that is just gross offense there. So no secondary assists either. That was an interesting stat. Okay, so we had a trade. I want to talk about it quickly. We'll give a little bit more to this, but did want to get some quick thoughts here on this big trade. Desmond Bane going from the Grizzlies out of nowhere. There was no reporting on this. Came out of nowhere with Shams. Desmond Bane for Kentavious Caldwell-Pope, Cole Anthony, 4 first-round picks. It's going to be the 16 pick in this year's draft. Phoenix's 2026 pick. That could be really nice. A 2028 unprotected first-rounder from the Magic, and then their 2030 as well. So yeah, Austin, first thoughts on this trade. Clearly, the Magic are going for it. Did you think it was too much? Yeah, how do you evaluate this trade from either side?
I did not think it was too much. That's probably the most like the sticker shock, and then just the sentiment that I hear on Twitter and everywhere is how much that they paid. And I'm not saying they didn't pay a lot because it is, but let's just go over like why he was worth this price, and this like outside of the Luka trade, dispel this notion that markets aren't fair. That outside of Nico Harrison, that teams aren't canvassing. Yep. Like, do you really think Memphis isn't, or Memphis and Orlando aren't out there like pricing deals and what are the other alternatives? Like clearly, like these trade markets are efficient. This was his going price. And so to say like, oh, these NBA front offices don't know what they're doing, and this is so an overpay, like, okay, well, clearly a team was willing to pay it, and there are probably other teams that were willing to pay right under that amount, right? So obviously, like, we know Orlando needs both ball handling and shooting in a way that Desmond Bane does both of those things. And he's both off the dribble and catch and shoot three-point shooter. He's one of the highest volume three-point shooters at 40% that we've seen in a long time. And then the one thing I'll note is like Bane's three-point volume has come down as he's gotten better at driving and gotten more ball handling responsibilities. I would hope that it comes back up. Like earlier in the year, we were showing a lot of like Desmond Bane over his threes, and we're like, okay, well, he might just not be that guy anymore. Like he's more of a diversified shot profile. I would hope that playing with Paolo and Franz, like, and getting the ball out, like he could up that volume back up. It's not gone forever. It's just kind of like a shift in how he was playing. But obviously, like, he's a really good fit for Orlando. And he's like, sometimes Memphis was using him as like a primary defender. I don't think he's that good, but I do think he's not a liability. Like, I think he's okay. He's fine. And Orlando's just a really good team defense in a way that they can hide like way worse defenders than Bane. So I think he's like at least a net neutral defensively, and he has positional size, and especially if he's playing the 1-2, and then he provides so much that they need on the offensive end. He's also fairly young, and he like fits in with the timeline of this core. Mm-hmm. And then Orlando just needs to sort of like consolidate their assets at some point. We've been talking about this for a long time. Like it's not just like in a vacuum. It's also like, okay, well, what are the alternatives? And like you need to like, it's not easy to find these impact players. They're not always available. You can't cash in your pieces at any time you want for the exact type of player that you want. So like you do have to pay that tax. And then on top of this, I think one thing that isn't highlighted enough is like salary matching is important for trades in the NBA, but not all salary matching is equal, because there are only so many players that the other team can give away that will fill that salary gap. And like it or not, like Cole Anthony and KCP have not been very good for Orlando. And so you're not just, a lot of times when you're matching salary, you're also giving away a piece that is valuable in its own right, that may not have been necessarily factored in, or that you may not realize in addition to the picks, but like that's like, what can you flip the other pieces for? And like I would say, and I think you guys would agree, that Cole Anthony at 13 million and KCP after 1 year in his deal are not positive trade assets. So like the salary matching that they got sent out to Phil Bane happened to be players that was also very valuable to get rid of. So like instead of adding Bane's salary, or sort of like sending out key rotation players, they also got rid of some bad money there, and that has value. So the last point I want to add before kicking it to you guys is like, I don't like this whole like system player narrative necessarily, that like, oh, this player is bad because he's a system player, but like KCP is clearly a system player. That doesn't mean he's not valuable in the right context. That just means that you do have to put him in the right context for him to have value. And we've seen like when he plays with LeBron and he plays with Jokic, he's super, super valuable. But we've also seen like when he is not getting those wide open looks, he's maybe not quite the shooter that we thought he was. and the truth is probably somewhere in the middle. So yeah, I think all of these factors are like relevant when thinking about the context behind 4 firsts for Desmond Bane. I don't know if you guys feel differently about any of that.
I 100% agree. Cole Anthony does have a team option 2 years, so it's really just 1 year deal, so that's not too bad. But yeah, KCP, he's got a player option for 2026, 27, and to your point, he's 32. He shot the ball poorly. His defense wasn't as good, in my opinion. So the age cliff, I think, is kind of coming for guys played a boatload of minutes. This guy's played a ton, so I definitely could see him. I'm with you. I think that getting off that money is like worth a pick in itself, maybe 2. So yeah, like comparing it to Mikal Bridges, obviously the Bojan Bogdanovic money that got off there, all that stuff. But yeah, I think this is a pretty good trade for both teams. Obviously, Memphis got a lot back, but and I guess we could talk about if I see some people thinking that like Memphis is going to rebuild. I don't think so. But yeah, Dink, thoughts on this trade, and then like where does Memphis go from here? Obviously, Orlando's like done, and I think what a great, just to add to Austin's point really quick, like what did we complain about Orlando all year? Like 3-point volume and additional handling. Like sign me up for that. Like Desmond Bane, one of the best players doing that there. But yeah, thoughts on this trade, Dink?
I loved the trade for both teams. And so I think Austin really highlighted a lot of the reasons that you would love it for the Magic in terms of consolidating assets and fit and need and timeline matching, salary space to absorb Bane, all of those things. I think you also need to look at the landscape of the Eastern Conference versus the landscape of the Western Conference and sort of where we're at. And in the Eastern Conference, you've got this opportunity now for the Orlando Magic where certainly, Indiana looks like they're steady going forward. New York looks like they're probably steady going forward, although the coaching search, we'll see where that kind of ends up. Milwaukee looks very vulnerable. Obviously, we'll see what happens with Giannis Antetokounmpo going forward. Boston just had the Jason Tatum injury that's going to have him miss a lot of next year, and they might be kind of reshuffling pieces around that like might create a little bit of a window there. And then there's not much else. Detroit is on the rise and showed that they're kind of like, becoming a team to consider. We'll see what Philadelphia looks like next year if you ever can get a healthy Joel Embiid and Paul George, and they add a top 5 pick to the mix as well. But ultimately, like, I think this was in Cleveland, obviously it looks pretty steady as well, but we'll see if they make moves. But I think this was an opportunity to strike while the iron is hot for Orlando, not only in terms of where their build is, but in terms of where the conference is. And then on the Memphis side of things, they get worked in round 1 of the playoffs when they're mostly healthy, and they get absolutely just stomped all over. They have to be a play-in team this year. They look like a team that's like, doesn't have enough firepower with this threesome with Bane, Jaren Jackson, and John Morant, and there were going to be financial implications down the road to keeping all 3 together at these price tags. And you look at the strength of the Western Conference, and it's like, man, the ceiling we need to shoot for is so much higher than what teams need to shoot for in the Eastern Conference. And they kind of got a lot of information. The ceiling that they're shooting for, they're pretty far off of right now. So having the opportunity to reset, try to get a player in the 2026 draft, which is a loaded draft class with that Phoenix pick that really can like reset things with Ja and Jaren, gives you the opportunity to extend Jaren now in a way. I thought it just made a lot of sense for both teams. Like Memphis, I think, was in this kind of existential period where they didn't really know they were going to have to make a tough decision at some point. If that tough decision comes with 4 firsts and 1 being a potential like top 10 pick in a great draft, that's a pretty decent off-ramp for a team that was in a little bit of limbo. So I thought it was a really good trade for both teams. I don't think Memphis is like selling Jaren and selling John now and like full rebuild. I don't agree with the thought process there. I think they just were in a financial conundrum where they had to kind of move off of one of these guys, and they got an opportunity to do so with Bane that like really fit in a way that I don't know that they'd have that opportunity with Ja. And Ja's also like the star and face and like has more star appeal. And I don't know that they'd want to with Jaren, because Jaren's such a unique defensive talent that can do all the things at the big spots that those guys don't come around a lot. So I think Bane was kind of the natural fit. And I also love Bane's toughness in going to an Orlando team that is tough and fights. And like Bane is that type of dude. So like, I think culture wise, he also fits great there. So I love this trade for both teams. I thought it made a ton of sense for both teams. And I think it makes sense for Memphis to like, take a step back in the short term and reset the timeline a little bit, where you can maybe get a little bit further away from Lakers, Denver, Golden State, some of these teams that are still like in the midst of their timeline, and maybe like step back and say, okay, like let's push our timeline out a little bit further to like get ourselves next back by hopefully getting a top 10 pick that we hit on in 2026, where we're like maybe more along the Houston, San Antonio, it's up and coming teams that are kind of coming up. I thought that all made sense to me from both team standpoints.
Yeah, it definitely feels like Jaren Jackson's going to get the bag now with the extension coming his way. Bane's getting paid a boatload, man. 39.4 this year. I'm sorry, 35. 30. He's getting paid almost 40 million a year on the new contract he signed. So it's really hard to just pay three players that much money. So get it from that perspective there. But yes, it sounds like you guys are all like, I don't think I've seen a lot of people on Twitter were like, oh yeah, Memphis is going to sell off their guys. I feel pretty strongly they're not going to. Thoughts on that? And, where do they go from? Is this kind of what they're going to roll with? They just kind of took the picks and now they have more ammo if they did want to kind of retool somewhere else, Austin?
Yeah, I think so. I think it was kind of like choosing between Ja and Bane. Not that they can't play together, but just like that's kind of like your lead guard that is taking up a ton of money. And I guess I don't know if they chose Ja or Bane happened to have the more wider trade appeal. I don't know what the truth is there. Maybe some of both. But Ja is younger. I want to say because he was like a one and done guy. Like Ja and Jaren are both pretty young, so I'm with you guys. Like sure they could rebuild, but like Ja and Jaren are like still ascending, so it's like they're the kind of pieces you would want to acquire if you were kind of rebuilding anyways. So, and I think they know Ja more intimately. Like Ja will always be more valuable to Memphis than he is anywhere else, given sort of all of his antics. So I think it is Ja and Jaren, and like Memphis trusts. The nice thing if you are a good draft and develop team is like picks are more valuable to you either to use them yourself or to retrade. Like they're so liquid, you could retrade them to get an asset, or you can just draft and just trust your system the way Memphis has. Like they've drafted and developed so well. So like Ja plus Jaren plus a bunch of like accentuating pieces. Like I think Santi took a big step forward this year. I think Vince Williams took a step forward last year, and if he comes back again next, like they have these pieces that they could either just rebuild naturally or use them again as ammo to acquire some other piece. So I'm with you guys.
Yeah, I'll add, he's going to turn 27 next week, Bane is. And to that point, and I was thinking, looking at the roster, just like, the flips, we saw Jalen Wells play really well earlier, kind of fade. G.G. Jackson, huge last year, went away. Scottie Pippen, bad, not really good 2 years ago, great this year. Like it was like very seesaw. But yeah, Dink, anything you want to add on where Memphis is now?
No, I think Austin knew the draft and develop stuff. I think it's really important that they're a franchise that has generally done that pretty well. And then I think they're also a franchise that when they've had their most success, they feel like they've had their most success by having deeper rosters than everybody else and not necessarily kind of the top heavy rosters. And I think that's something that we've been a little bit critical of them as a roster build team the last couple of years when, they made the Marcus Smart trade, when they, got rid of Tyus Jones. They're just their bench depth had kind of taken a hit in terms of being playoff ready bench depth. And I think they have a lot of these young guys that they didn't have a lot of space to play too, right? Like we were running into issues where like, okay, are they going to be able to play Vince Williams and G.G. Jackson? Like they don't really have the space to take the time to develop these guys. So I think just kind of resetting the timeline that makes sense with all of those players. Gigi's very young. Like I think that makes a ton of sense and clears a little bit. So I think it's like a short term step back and then like looking to 2026, 2027 as like target points to starting to kind of rebuild and re-enter the middle of the playoff mix in the Western Conference, and then hope 2028, 2029 looking at like, okay, now we're back in contender window again.
For sure. So we'll see what happens. We've got the Kevin Durant trade stuff heating up really, really big right now. Maybe we'll have that next time. We'll see. But anything else you want to mention, Austin, for either this trade or where the finals are?
I do have a final take since we've been doing that, but I don't have anything else to add. If there's anything else to talk about,
go for it.
Yeah, everyone was talking about how like from a ratings perspective, sort of like OKC Indiana isn't the finals that you may want, but I do think in a lot of ways it's the finals that the NBA does want. Like you're thinking about how much the league has been criticized for the Heatles and then the Warriors and just all of these teams that are building really top heavy rosters that are also oftentimes bought, and both teams were like developed in-house basically. And so like if you're trying to, I think they've been rightfully criticized in the way that the product has kind of the best teams have been the best teams recently, but not so this year. Both teams like were very ethically developed, right? Like a lot of homegrown pieces, and not just at the top. Like sure, OKC nailed Chet and J-Dub, but like think about like Lou Dort and Ben Shepherd and all of these other pieces that really were quote unquote player development successes. And I was looking at when we were talking about just looking at the box score today, I was like, man, how many of these guys were? It's just Isaiah Hartenstein between both teams. That is like the only player in either rotation that was a free agent signing. Like the other ones might have been like re-signed, but like they were all trade or draft, and like I think that's just a credit to both teams, not just the starting unit, but 1 through 9. Like they're all kind of like what I would consider homegrown pieces, or pieces that were acquired in trade using homegrown pieces. And then the other part I wanted to note is, like, we talked about how Paul George basically rebuilt OKC, but you could argue like this finals is the finals that Paul George built, because Indiana like drafted Paul George and then traded him for Sabonis and Oladipo. Sabonis has a good few years with Indiana, and then it's traded for Halliburton. So shout out Paul George. This is the finals that he built.
Podcast P in the mix here. All right, Dink, anything else you want to mention, and we can get out of here?
No, I love that perspective, and I think it's a great thing for the NBA to also have two teams that play stylistically very different. I think for viewership, and a lot of the criticisms for people who casually watch the NBA, or maybe don't even watch the NBA at all and just like to log criticisms out there, are around like defensive effort and intensity and ball movement. And it's like, okay, well, here's one team that moves the ball a ton, and here's both teams who compete like hell on the defensive end with a bunch of young players that you might not know about. And I think that's great for the game. And I think in general, it's great to have an NBA Finals that the ball knowers, the people who love the NBA, really love. And I think that's great too. Like you can have all sorts of finals throughout history, and this one might not be for the casuals, and that's cool. Like I'm good with that. Maybe we can convert some casuals to being more into the league wholesale as a result. But no, nothing else. Appreciate you guys taking the time. Appreciate everybody out there listening. Fun to talk Game 5 and forward of this NBA Final Series, and fun to break down the Desmond Bane trade that I think is one of the guys that we all like a lot as a player individually, and a team that is taking a swing with Orlando, a team that has been considered conservative in the past in their front office decisions. So a lot of fun stuff to talk through on this podcast. I really enjoyed it. And for those of you who are interested in more of our content, you can go to establishedrun.com/subscribe for any information on our premium product offerings, both on the NBA and the WNBA. If you're listening along on iTunes or Spotify, consider leaving a rating and review, as that helps us circulate this podcast. And if you're watching along on our YouTube channel, Established Run NBA, consider liking and subscribing to the channel, as you can get more of our content there. But appreciate you all tuning in, whether you're listening, watching, however you're consuming this content. We appreciate it, and you're the reason we're able to create it. So thank you.
All right. Shout out my guy Desmond Bane. I appreciate you guys listening. Catch you guys next time.